This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
Miss Alex McCoy, can you please tell the listeners where you're at in the world right now?
I am in Phoenix, Arizona, working at Phoenix Children's Hospital.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dylan Callier, and today I am with Alex McCoy, a fit nurse, and we're going to talk all about nursing and working out and her journey. And Alex, can you please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got into traveling, kind of what you're doing now and where you see yourself heading?
Yeah, so I've been traveling for just over 2 years. I was working as a nurse while my husband was in grad school, and we had a lot of financial goals that we were trying to meet, and so I started looking into traveling as an opportunity to just make more money, essentially. And so I started out kind of traveling locally, and I would work 3 days and then come home for 3 or 4 days in between shifts, and that worked out really well for my first 2 assignments. And then I did a couple local assignments while my husband finished up his clinicals, and then I did, and then this is now my second assignment, like actually on the road. So we were in Wisconsin for 19 weeks, starting last August, and now we're in Phoenix. So I've kind of done a little bit of different styles of traveling, I guess you could say. So it's been kind of interesting, because I have, I kind of tell people there's lots of different ways you can do it. So.
Got it. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And now what unit do you usually stick in as a nurse?
So I have always done pediatrics. I started as a CNA in nursing school, working in the pediatric ICU, got hired on in a pediatrics unit at it was a level 1 trauma center in Southern Missouri, and got a really broad knowledge base there. So I did anything from oncology to burns, and then did a little bit of PICU and NICU as well. And then as a traveler, I've pretty much stuck to pediatric med surg, pediatric hematology, oncology. So pretty much I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, I guess, in peds med surg, but that's kind of what I stick to.
Okay. And you are also from Missouri, just on the other side of the states, and so we got that in common as well. Can you describe what a typical shift would look for you as a pediatric nurse?
Yeah. So usually, we come in, get report on however many patients we have. I would say in peds, it usually varies from about 3 to up to 5, depending on the hospital and how short staffed they are. And I think the big thing with peds is you have to be really, very conscientious of your timing with things. So especially when I'm on day shift, sometimes it's kind of nice because if you've got 3 sleeping babies, you're not going to go wake up 3 sleeping babies. So you usually get to kind of start your days a little bit slower, let everybody kind of wake up. I feel unless there's something important going on. And then the other thing with pediatrics though, is you do have to know that most things are going to take a little bit longer than they would with adults. You might have to, it might take 5 minutes to get a kid to take a pill versus an adult. It would take 30 seconds.
Got it.
So kind of planning out your day around that, which patients are going to be more time consuming, which families are going to be more time consuming. And just kind of budget your time accordingly. And I kind of like nursing, and I've recently transitioned to more day shift assignments, because you kind of get to know everything that's going on with your patient, from tests to therapies to case management, social work, that kind of thing. I really like being involved in kind of the whole circle of what's going on with my patients. So.
Got it. Very cool. So you had quite a good background in peds before you started traveling. What is usually kind of the amount of experience a nurse would need in pediatrics before they're kind of set to start traveling in pediatrics?
Yeah, I would say, so everybody's pretty much going to tell you 2 years. I've like cheated on that a little bit. I was about 18 months when I started traveling. But what I tell people is that it also depends on where you work and how comfortable you are. I knew I was coming from a facility that was chronically staffed, so we were used to budgeting our time well. We were used to prioritize and critical think a lot. Whereas some facilities that are, you're a lot luckier and you don't have to figure out how to juggle 5 or 6 patients at one time. You're only juggling 3 or 4, and you might need a little bit more experience to really get the opportunities to learn that you'll need once you go to travel. So I would definitely recommend 2 years for most people, just to really feel confident and know when you get there, you can jump into literally any kind of situation.
Yeah.
Because even if it sounds good on the surface, there's usually like, there might be some surprising elements once you get to wherever you're going, and you have to be ready for those as well. So,
okay. So you show up to the new hospital and you're ready to go, you're ready to work with some kids. What's the typical orientation for a pediatric nurse?
I would say, I think they're a little bit more generous with peds, which has been kind of nice. Usually we get at least a day of, hospital orientation. Sometimes it's like a day of hospital orientation, then a half day of computer orientation. And then pretty much everywhere I've gone, I've gotten 2 full 12-hour shifts like on the unit, which is really nice. I know for a lot of adult nurses, they don't get that much opportunity as far as training goes. So I would say usually my first week has all been orientation, and it's usually just some combination of clinical versus like computer and core orientation type stuff.
Okay. And I would totally agree with that. I mean, pediatrics is something that I feel like takes a little bit more time, even on the therapy side of things. And because you have to know everything, you have to know neuro and blood and musculoskeletal and age stuff, and gosh, like so much. Yeah. Definitely very impressed with any nurses or any healthcare practitioner that takes care of kids.
Oh, well, thanks. I love it. I don't think I could do adults. So my husband works with like super old people most of the time. And so we're like polar opposites. And we're both
all
like,
the cute old ladies can be great too.
Yeah, no, I mean, he has lots of funny stories.
Oh yeah, so good. So coming back just a little bit, when you're preparing to go to the hospital during that interview process, can you kind of give a rundown of what that looks like? And is there anything specific to pediatrics that you're looking for or that you ask about?
I think the biggest thing for me is knowing if I'm going to an adult only facility or a peds only facility, or if I'm going to a facility that is like an adult hospital with a pediatrics unit within it. Because the thing that I really want to know about if I'm going to an adult facility is what my float expectations are going to be. Like I said, with pediatrics, I'm pretty comfortable with most specialties within peds med surg. And I feel pretty confident that like if I get floated within a pediatric hospital, I'll be able to handle that assignment. But if I go to an adult facility, I want to know, I'm just upfront, like I'm not going to take adult patients because I don't feel comfortable with that. Okay. And the other big thing that I like to ask is, are the nurses expected to sit with older adult patients? Because a lot of times if travelers are first to float, what I found is in adult facilities, a lot of times you'll get floated to be like a 1-to-1 with a patient that's confused or violent or anything like that. So it's not like a deal breaker for me. I just like to know that going in when I'm considering everything. And then the big thing for me is ratios. And what I tell people, and this, I don't mean for this to sound salty or anything, I just want to be realistic, is usually if I ask what a ratio is going to be on a floor and they tell me 3 to 4 patients, I usually add like a patient onto that and think like, okay, well, can I handle 4 to 5 patients? Just knowing that most of the time, if hiring travelers, they're probably going to be short staffed. There's probably going to be days where we're stretched a little bit thin. And I just take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt and, put that into my considerations when I'm weighing travel options. I think that's pretty much it as far as like my big questions is mostly floating and ratios, because those to me are the two things that are going to get you in the most trouble or most concerning spots where you might actually start getting concerned about your license or anything like that. So
okay, yeah, I can agree with the patient part of it. So for this contract I was on, I had an interview, and during the interview she said, oh, usually we see about 12 to 15 patients per day. I'm an outpatient. And she said, but we can see up to 20 patients per day. Is that something you're comfortable with? And so what I took that as is I'm going to be seeing 20 patients every day.
Right.
Which it hasn't been every day, but it's been pretty darn close. So just picking up on those things between the lines when you're in that interview process. When negotiating, especially when it comes to hospitals specifically, is there any kind of like leeway that you have with, negotiating that you're not going to be floating around or that you're not going to be sitting with an adult? What are some other things that you kind of throw in there for negotiations?
I like to see, what areas I'm expected to float to take patients. Like, for example, I had one contract that said may float to, I think it said pediatric ICU to take appropriate patients, or maybe used at any time to be a sitter, and then actually gave like the explanation for what a sitter entailed. Like I said, I'm not super picky about that part of it. Like I can handle sitting with an adult patient, and that's my personal preference, but I have seen people put things like will not sit with psych patients so they don't end up with someone that's like being physically aggressive or anything like that. That's honestly, like in pediatrics, like we get those patients on occasion, but we're not really trained to deal with like a 250-pound male coming at us. We just don't have as much experience as far as like de-escalation in those situations. Other than that, I make sure to have my shift documented in my contract. And I was going to say, I don't think I have anything else like I'm probably err on the side of being a little too relaxed sometimes with my contracts. But like I said, if I'm going to a pediatric hospital, especially, I feel pretty confident that like I'm not going to be put into a situation where I'm going to be concerned. And I also know that for me, like I'm not afraid to speak up in that situation. So.
Yeah. Are you currently on days or nights?
I'm on days this assignment.
Days. Okay.
Yeah.
And that'd be important. Luckily, as a therapist, I don't have to worry about that too much. It's just, it's during the day, and do I have to work weekends? And that's about the only question I have to ask for shifts.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is rotating. I've done that before, and I don't know that I could rotate again. It was pretty awful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any specific red flags that you look for that might say, oh, I need to stay away from this place? And that can be during the interview that you kind of pick up in, or maybe it's the first day you show up and it's something that you're keeping an eye out for.
For me, I think for me, weekend scheduling is really important. I don't usually put that in my contract, but I kind of feel out with the manager, am I going to be every other? Am I going to be every third? Because you have heard lots of stories of travelers being scheduled every weekend or things like that. And like I did have one interview that I ultimately turned down the position because she told me she needed somebody Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or something like that. And my husband's off on Saturdays and Sundays. And I was like, well, that's not really going to work. We literally never get to do anything. And so, I tried to negotiate within the interview. I was like, I really like the sound of this position, and I would totally be interested if I could negotiate like an every other weekend. And the manager was pretty steadfast on needing that weekend coverage. And so I just moved on to the next job. But I think I still would have been hesitant, even if she had been like, oh, maybe we can make it work. I think that for me, like the fact she had mentioned needing weekend coverage would have been a big red flag as far as accepting a contract. Other than that, just being dishonest. And, if you get there and you're told one thing and it turns out to be something different. I was told my first contract that it was an adult hospital that accepted peds. And I was told that their average peds population would be 3 to 4 patients. And I would be taking like maybe 1 or 2 adult patients, like low acuity, to help the rest of the staff. And I got there and the staff was pretty quick to tell me, no, our typical peds population is like 1 to 2, and you're going to be taking like 3 or 4 adults.
Yeah.
So I felt it out the first couple shifts. I asked a lot of questions, and I just kind of got to know like the types of patients I was going to be dealing with on the adult side to make sure I was going to feel comfortable. And I ended up staying, and it was fine. It was a learning opportunity, but I did have to like put my foot down a couple times of like, I don't feel comfortable with this, or I'm going to need somebody else to really help me out in this situation, because this is not something that we deal with a lot in pediatrics. And I think that's the biggest thing that traveling has taught me, is just like having a voice and speaking up, because you're the only one there to advocate for you. And I haven't had any situations where it's like staff versus travelers or anything nightmarish, but you know, they're going to keep their full-time staff happy first, because they can't afford to lose any more full-time staff in most situations.
Yeah.
So you really have to be able to speak up and be like, no, this is what I know is right, or this is what I feel comfortable with, and just stand your ground. So that's, it's taught me a lot as far as that goes, because I used to be kind of more timid, I think.
Got it. Yeah. I think traveling kind of really brings that out of you. I was recently having a conversation where what's better, to be an introvert or an extrovert when you travel? And it's like, well, I mean, you're going to learn skills either way. So an extrovert's going to go out and, you know, be really open to meeting people, but at the same time, those first 2 weeks, you don't really know anyone when you show up. And so you're going to get used to, okay, what do I do on my own time? Where do I go? How do I hang out? How do I find people? Whereas the introvert is going to learn how to, you know, be more assertive and get in those conversations and say hi and make friends and things like that.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's like, I feel like I'm kind of a mix sometimes. So it's like definitely made certain areas stronger as far as my personality goes, I think.
For sure. What is something that you travel with that you don't feel like you could travel without?
I have a really awesome memory foam pillow that my husband and I both got one for our weddings, and we joke like that's like top of priority list when we're packing, like our pillows have to come with us.
Oh, wow.
Other than that, I mean, good shoes, compression socks, got to take care of your feet and your body, of course. And then my pets, I have a cat and a dog, and those are priority too. Like I see stories of people getting rid of their pets to go travel, and I'm like, I could never do that. Like that's just not an option.
You monster.
So, yeah. I mean, I try not to judge, but I'm like, that wouldn't work. So yeah.
Well, I've heard of people getting rid of boyfriends and girlfriends to go travel. So, but I don't know. I feel like pets are so much more like you're taking care of them. Like you know, you have that bond.
They're a little more like go with the flow too. So, you know, like,
I don't know. I've been told I tend to like pets more than or dogs, especially more than I like people, which is funny because I work with people for a living, but.
Yeah, that's my husband. He's like, he would rather hang out with the cat than pretty much anybody, I'd say. He just gave me a thumbs up.
How's been traveling with a dog and a cat? So I've heard, you know, traveling with pets, they're going to a new area so often. How have your pets handled that? And then how is it for trying to find housing with them?
Yeah. So we started out with just our cat, our first assignment, and she's not a fan of traveling in the car. So it's been an adjustment. We kind of have done a lot of trial and error. We tried traveling with her out of the kennel, traveling in the kennel. Now we have a bigger kennel. And so it's been, like I said, a lot of trial and error. So we actually put her like in a dog crate style kennel with like a little litter box, and she just stays there the whole ride. And if she makes a mess in there, then we can just clean it, you know. And other than that, like she does pretty well when we're stopped. Like if we're in a hotel, she adjusts really well. Our dog, we just got like a month and a half ago. Okay. So she hasn't done any long road trips, but we did drive to the Grand Canyon with her. And my husband said, like, when we got a dog, he was like, we're going to put her in the car and we're going to drive around with her all the time because we can't have two animals that hate the car. So I think that's been our main thing, is like getting a pet while traveling. We're like trying to adjust her well. We went ahead and took her on a road trip when she was pretty small. She's good at riding in the car. And so we're hopeful that like we're driving to Seattle in April and it'll be 22 hours. And so I think for the most part, she'll hopefully just like kind of chill and chew her toys and be good. And just bring lots of paper towels. I think that's the other thing I've learned, because you just never know what's going to happen when you've got two animals in the car.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then how's finding like housing with your pets?
It's been a lot easier than I think. I was scared it was going to be harder.
Okay.
We actually lived in two places our first assignment, because it was a ski lodge, and once we extended that, it was like ski season, and so we couldn't stay there anymore. And so we went from an extended stay to an Airbnb. And so, I mean, it definitely rules out a lot of options, but it's never gotten to the point where we're like, there's no options left.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing is, I would say 2 is probably the max you could travel with, because most apartment complexes and things have a two pet limit. Okay. And you also just have to be prepared. Like, they're just kind of expensive. Like, most places have a per pet deposit, and it doesn't look that bad if you're going to be there for 12 months. But when you think about every 3 months having to pay $300-$400 sometimes, it just adds up quick. Just another expense that you have to be willing to absorb. So
yeah. Okay. Very cool.
So,
well, is there any books or podcasts or personalities that you kind of follow that you would recommend? This could be traveling related, this could be fitness related, kind of whatever your interests are.
Yeah. So I really I would say my number one fitness account that I follow is called PaleoMG. And her name's Julie Bauer. She kind of has run the gamut. Like, she was a CrossFit athlete, and then she writes recipes. And I don't even follow the paleo diet, but I still read her blog every single day, religiously. And now she also she travels a lot. Since she's a blogger, she has the flexibility to do that. And then she also does some fashion and skincare. It's kind of all sorts of girly stuff rolled into one. And so she's probably my favorite. And she posts actually a lot of travel friendly workouts and things like that. So that's a good one. I also like Melissa Hartwig, who founded the Whole 30. I was really into paleo for a while, so I got stuck on all these people.
What was the name of that one?
Melissa Hartwig.
Uh-huh.
She's the founder of the Whole 30. Well, she co-founded that with her ex-husband. And same thing. She travels a lot. She is kind of always on the go. And I think that those accounts really inspire me to be well, there's really no excuse not to at least have some sort of health conscious effort or physical activity in your life, even when it's hectic, even when it's constantly changing and things like that. So those are probably my top 2 favorites that I follow. Geek out. I'm an Instagram nerd, so that's all. I'm all over their Instagram pages.
That's awesome. So you also have a blog on fitness. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you have a specific niche for that blog? And then we'll also kind of get into your fit story and kind of where you're coming from in your journey.
Yeah. So I started my blog. I think it was the fall before I started traveling in February of 2016. So I believe I started my blog. I should really know this, but I think it was August or September of 2015. And it started out just I was talking a lot about paying off debt, and my husband was in school. I was the sole income for our family. And so it was a lot about budgeting and kind of some of our successes there. And then I started traveling shortly thereafter. And I had also, because I was crazy, I decided to start traveling right after I'd committed to competing in a bikini competition. And so it kind of worked out though. So I rolled all of that in together to talk about travel nursing and fitness and prioritizing that, when you're on the road, when you've got a crazy schedule. And at that point I was, living in a hotel 3 days a week and then driving home after a 12-hour night shift. And I was on nights just to top it all off. And so it was just kind of my story about how things went and what I was learning along the way. And it's kind of grown from there.
Very cool. How was preparing for a bikini competition?
It's tough. So I did one at my sophomore year of college, and the trainer I had, she just was very old school in her style. And so it was very miserable. It was, stereotypical, hours and hours of cardio and eating nothing but egg whites and tilapia. And looking back, I'm I don't even know how I did that because I love to eat and I like food variety. And yeah, I don't know. I just had like something clicked in my brain and I was like, I've got to change and I've got to feel better. And I did. And then so when I did another one, it would have been like 5 years later or something like that, I think. My goal was to go about it in a more healthy way. And it was really more to prove, 4 years ago, my husband just corrected me, or 4 years apart. It was more to like prove to myself that I could do it like more in a mentally and physically more healthy way. And so it was really cool because I got to learn about more like balanced intake and feeding your body properly and conditioning it properly versus just like working it to the grindstone and eating, you know, nothing as far as like fat and calories go. I was able to actually like see that there's a lot of good science behind nutrition and exercise. And I mean, I didn't like place or anything, and I don't think I'll ever do another competition, but it was really cool. Just like say I did it in a better way, I guess. So.
Yeah. I had gotten interested in bodybuilding competitions during my pretty much second to fifth year of college. So from undergrad into graduate school. And I had a friend and my old roommate who did a lot of nutrition plans for competitors. And so got to finally learn a little bit more about nutrition, which is such a big part of it, but there's so much just noise out there on the internet and you start reading this stuff. And I had actually fallen into what classified as a eating disorder my third year, because kind of what you were saying, it was the only things I ate, chicken, usually out of a can, broccoli and olive oil. Those are, and I am an obsessive personality. And so if I broke that and say I was like I was at a school meeting and there was a pizza there and I had a slice, it's like, well, I already messed up my diet. Might as well eat an entire pizza. And so I'd eat the whole thing. And then the next day you'd go back and you'd feel guilty. And so you would, not only would I go back to eating those three things, I would eat less of those three things to like, you know, punish or make it up for what I did the day before. And it was just this really negative cycle. And it wasn't until I found if it fits your macros that I was able to break that to where it's more of a calorie counting, but it also goes into like proteins, carbs, and fats. And as long as you get your fiber in for the day, that's basically all I followed. And then I was able to still remain obsessive, but I was still able to kind of treat myself and have that pizza without feeling guilty about it and like, you know, going into that cycle the next day.
Right. Well, and I count macros too. And that's I trained for my second competition. And I think the biggest thing it taught me was that like, it does matter if you eat one piece of pizza or 4 pieces of pizza. Like when you're in that like binge strict cycle, you're like, oh, I screwed up my super perfect diet. So like, I'll just blow it all out of the water because like, it doesn't matter because I made this one little tiny mistake. And I think for me, like, macros like taught me like, no, like it makes a difference. Like if I choose to have like an egg white scramble in the morning because I know I'm going to have like a little bit bigger fancy dinner, you know, it does make a difference for those little choices and how they add up and really come together and make like a whole picture of health instead of this like little tiny mindset of like, I can only have these certain foods and everything else is bad. It kind of makes it just broaden my concept of like how nutrition works for your body and how calorie intake works. And yeah, I think I think that there's a reason that like so many people have found it and stuck with it. So
absolutely. And something that I found out, and for those interested in getting more conscious about their nutrition or learning more about if it fits your macros, the two people that I followed were Dr. Lane Norton, who is a nutritionist or a PhD in protein synthesis, and So-Hee Lee. I think she's So-Hee Lee Fit. And they were able to break it down and show like what reverse dieting was, so that after a restriction like you went through for your competitions, you're able to reverse diet out of that so that you don't have a crash diet where you go really low and then all your hormones are messed up. And then you start adding in not even more food, but just the food that you were eating before. And you start gaining not only weight back to what you were before, but more because your hormones are in this save it mode.
Right. Well, and that's what was kind of cool is I was able to reverse diet. I used a trainer. And so I knew when I committed to the show, I wasn't just committing to the 18 weeks or whatever it was that I was training. It was, beyond that, I planned to keep her on for like a reverse diet, and she worked me through that. And so now it's kind of cool because I can look at measurements. I was just doing this, like where my calories and my weight and my inches were. And it's like, I feel like I'm heavier right now because I've pretty much just been like eating for strength for the last like year and a half or so.
Yeah.
And, but it's cool to look at my measurements because I'm like, okay, but like my waist size is smaller than it was, 2 years ago when I weighed this amount. So it does make a difference, and it's kind of a mind game, but
definitely. Oh my gosh. I wasn't even preparing for a show, but I just wanted to get lean and then try and reverse diet out of it. And I have a higher metabolism, whatever you want to call it, energy expenditure, anyhow. And so I was able to reverse diet up to about 3,000 calories a day. And then the lowest I was able to go was like 1,200, and I was going absolutely nuts. And
oh my gosh.
Sitting, which is like, some people was like, oh my gosh, that's normal. But I was like freaking out. I would go and I would work at my job. And at my job that I was working at, was like mostly desk work. I was just kind of sitting there studying. And I remember having, I bought some like boxes of cereal to take back to my apartment. And well, I was hungry. So I walked out in my car and grabbed this box of cereal, ate the entire box dry. And I was still hungry. Went back, got a second box, ate the entire box dry. And then you have this like pregnancy, like food baby.
Oh yeah.
And that's when I realized I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I'm
there's something needs to change. Yeah.
But yeah, so if it fits your macros definitely helped me with that. But you could still definitely fall off the bandwagon with those.
Oh,
you
yeah.
get too aggressive with the restrictions.
Right.
How, can you talk a little bit more about your journey? I know, what are your workouts consistently? I believe you're a CrossFitter. And how is finding gyms at each location that you go to?
Yeah. So I started, do you want me to start with like the very beginning?
Sure.
Okay. So I was a swimmer in high school. That was like my first taste of like any sort of like real athletic endeavor. And I really liked it because I'm more competitive with myself than I am with other people. Like I could care less how everybody else is doing. I'm worried about myself. And I'm not naturally very athletic. So I think part of that's like, well, it's hard for me to keep up with other people. So it's better for me to look at the little progress that I've made. And that's what I kind of learned with swimming, and really like discipline and how like working hard pays off in the end. And so then I went to college. First like year and a half, I did like nothing. I gained like, the freshman 20, 30, whatever. And then my mom had started working out with a trainer. And at that point, like all I had done for physical activity was swimming. And so I really realized like I know nothing about working out in the gym. I don't really know what to do with the gym. And so my mom actually paid for me to get some personal training classes because she realized like how important that was to have that knowledge. And so I worked with that trainer. She trained me through the competition. And then I got done and I was like I said, I was like over counting food. I was kind of burnt out on dieting, but I like really enjoyed weightlifting. And so I decided to check out a CrossFit gym that I'd seen a friend of mine, like a Facebook friend going to. And I just like fell in love. Like I was like, I don't know, like something just clicked. And that's what I tell people is like, just keep trying stuff. Cause like I tried Zumba, like when I was training for my competition, I had tried Zumba, I had tried spin, like different things to like make cardio more interesting. And they were all right. But it was like, I like was at CrossFit, like just for my on-ramp class. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I love to do. And so I was there through nursing school. And I mean, it was cool because even on days that I was like totally burnt out and exhausted, and this is true now when I'm exhausted from work, like I go into the gym and like the plan is already made for me. The motivation's already there because you've got people watching you. So you can't just like half-ass it. I mean, you can a little bit, but like you can't just like go through the motions. Like you have to push yourself every single time. And so I did that. Then we moved to Southern Missouri and there was no gym in the town that we were living in. So I got back more into like regular gym workouts, trained for my second bodybuilding competition, got done with that, and we moved home to Kansas City. And that's when I was like, I miss CrossFit. Like, I have to get back into this. So now I do CrossFit and count my macros, which is really cool because I've definitely, like, I'm not a person that builds muscle easily. And it's just really cool, like how paying attention to like your protein and your carb intake, I feel like specifically really helps with muscle building and like seeing changes in your body. And, like, I'm not naturally a ripped person or like a toned person. And it's like, even when I feel like I'm a little bit fluffier, like I can still see more muscle tone now than I ever did before. And so that's just, I mean, it's just really cool. And like I said, the environment is just pretty much, I mean, and I will say like CrossFit gyms do vary. So it's like, it can be hit or miss, but if you go to one and you don't like it, like I would encourage you to try a different one, see if the environment's different somewhere else.
Got it.
And that's been a little bit hard with traveling. Like, so the way I usually find gyms is I just go CrossFit.com and they have an affiliate map. And in order to be a CrossFit gym, you have to pay an affiliate fee. And so you can look up literally every single gym in the entire world now that they're pretty much worldwide. And so that's where I usually start. And then I kind of compare prices. I like to look and see like the level of coaches that they have. So there's CrossFit level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. And CrossFit level 1 is like a weekend course. And then CrossFit level 2 is a little bit more intensive. You have to have a better knowledge base. Level 3, like super intense as far as like physiology and anatomy and things like that. And so I always like to see if there's maybe like a CrossFit level 2 coach or 2 mixed in, because I just feel like they just a little bit more informative when it comes to coaching, especially with body mechanics and things like that. So that's kind of where I start. And then obviously like pricing's important too. Like I have to be conscious of that.
Absolutely.
Gyms are expensive, but I mean, like I said, I feel like I get what I pay for as far as motivation and a workout plan written for me every day. So
that's nice. Yeah. Well, if you ever want to talk about biomechanics, body mechanics, like I'll nerd out about that. Very cool. Before we started recording, we were kind of talking about how you had maybe struggled a little bit when you were working nights. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah. So I guess I kind of skipped. I was trying to be short-winded on my whole fitness journey part. But basically, when I started working as a nurse, as a new grad, I was on nights, and I was part of a new grad residency where we were expected to go to these classes. Like, I think it was a couple times a month. And I was saving for a wedding. So I was like picking up every drop of overtime I could get my hands on. And I pretty much just let everything out the window for about 6 months. I stopped eating well. I didn't exercise. My husband had started PT school. So like he was kind of in the same boat. Like we were both going through this really stressful transition period. And so we both just kind of let ourselves go a lot. And we hit, so that was like June, July. And by January, we were both like, oh my God, we've got it. This, first of all, we have to get married in like 8 months and go on our honeymoon. And second of all, we feel terrible, you know? And so we started out, I actually started out doing Insanity. All the Beachbody fans out there, we bought Insanity. With Sean T.
And did like the home workouts and stuff, and just kind of got back into it. And the biggest thing for me was figuring out like nights, like, do I need to work out after I get off or before I go into work? And what I found with nights and days is like working a 12-hour shift, I'm just so drained at the end of it that I have to go before work or I won't go. Like, especially because you never know what the shift is going to bring. So like 9 times out of 10, if I try and go after work, I mentally with myself, I'm like, oh, well, you had a really hard day today. You know, like, wah, like, poor you. Like, yo, now you don't have to go to the gym. And so to just like skip that part and not give myself that option, I'm like, you just have to go before work. So for night shift, I would typically get up around like 3:30, go to the gym. And by get up, I mean like roll out of bed, literally chug pre-workout, and then like drive to the gym before I could think about it, get my workout in, and then I could still like have dinner at home before my shift. And so that's, and just like prioritizing sleep, but you also have to be, I think on night to be more strict with your sleep. Like I knew on my last day off, like if I slept until 4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon, then I would be so screwed up for all of my days off. And so I would set an alarm at like a certain time. You know, it was usually I would let myself sleep like 3 or 4 hours, and then like just you have to find this like mental toughness to be like, no, I've got to get up and flip my schedule back to a normal schedule, or I'm never going to have like any halfway normal life. Like, so that there's a lot of discipline, I think, with nights that you don't have to worry about as much with days as far as your sleep goes. And so that's like that was my biggest struggle, I think, was realizing like I do have to short myself on sleep some days to actually stay on a normal schedule like 90% of the time. So
got it. Yeah, I think that's so important with the fitness journeys is finding what works for you. So what works for you is before you start, even when you're doing day shift, is going in. And I know I did that for 1 year during my PT school, and that's when most or the majority of my injuries happened, because I wasn't warming up properly, because I didn't have enough time in the morning to do so before I had to run to class. And that's when like all my back injuries ended up happening.
Right.
So I know that it would be better for me to work out after. And then if I skip, I usually feel pretty guilty. So, and it's also a release for me. So I don't have that problem of, you know, working a full day and then going to the gym, because that's like what I'm looking forward to.
Right.
Also, I don't eat breakfast in the morning. And I know that's completely like against what normal people say. But I found if I eat in the morning, I will be hungry 2 hours later. It's like waking up a bear, and it won't stop. And so I usually get up, I'll drink coffee, sip on that until about 11 a.m., 12. And then that's when I have my first meal. And so I'll have a big lunch, I'll have a big dinner. And then I usually have like a shake or something in there kind of thrown in somewhere. But that's usually what my meal times look like for now.
Yeah. And I would say like, and I mean, there are people that go after work on nights. I know a lot of people that do, and you just have to figure out, like I said, what works for you, and trial and error. And that's what I encourage a lot of people to do too, is because I think a lot of people want like an easy answer. And for anybody that works full time, like there's not an easy answer. It's what's your priority and what are you going to make time for in your schedule, because it's just not easy any way you slice it. Either you've got to get up early, or you're going to have dinner later, or you know, anything in between. So
that's one of my favorite lines, and that was something I picked up last year, is don't say you're too busy for it, say it isn't a priority, because it changes the meaning. If I'm just really not focused on my diet right now, or I don't have time to worry about what I'm eating. It's like, no, you're not making what you're eating a priority. Oh, I don't have time at the end of the day to play with my kids. No, you're not making your kids a priority. And it kind of changes the tone and makes you realize like, oh, like I need to get it into gear.
And I think like retraining your brain, because like I am not a morning person. You ask my husband, he doesn't talk to me for like an hour after I wake up. And so me, like I've been getting up at 4:15 in the morning. Like I was really scared to go to days, because I had actually gotten into such a good rhythm on nights that I did better when I was on night shift as far as staying on some sort of like gym routine. And so switching to days, like you just have to train your brain. Like people are like, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, you just start doing it, and then eventually it gets a little bit easier. So like, it's like practice makes perfect. And even with like your sleep schedule, and now on my days off, I'm up at like 6 a.m., which is not me at all. But it's like that first like month or two is probably just going to be hard, and you just kind of have to like suck it up and realize it's going to be hard for a little bit, but it'll be worth it in the long run, so.
I forget what book I was listening to when this line came up. It was like, how do you do so-and-so? Well, it's pig-headed discipline and grit. And you just grind through it, and then eventually you're where you want to be.
Right. Yeah.
Is there anything that was surprisingly challenging when you started traveling? That could be with fitness, that could be with nutrition, but something like you didn't really see being a challenge, and then all of a sudden popped up and you're like, oh wow, this is harder than I thought.
Yeah. For nutrition at first, it was definitely like planning all of my meals. I meal prep a little bit, but it's usually like I meal prep like some chicken, and then I'll just like throw it into a wrap or eat it with some veggies or something. Like, I'm not the type of person that has like 4 meals all packed and ready for the week for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, that just doesn't really work for me because I get bored. And so when I first started traveling and I was staying in a hotel, I really had to think ahead and get more disciplined with that. And so I actually would take like little labels and label, like I had all my Tupperware and I would prep all my food. And then I would put little labels on it that said like Tuesday breakfast, Tuesday snack, Tuesday, like literally everything, because I was tired because I was driving more to, I'd have to drive 2 hours to get to my assignment and then go to work that night. And so I knew that way my like half asleep brain wouldn't have to think that hard. And all I had to do was like get the food out of the fridge and eat it. So that was a big adjustment for me. And it's made it kind of nice now that I'm not doing that, but it's still like if you're on a road trip or something, that's something to keep in mind. And then I think for me, like I consider myself a pretty like outgoing person when I have to be. Like I like my alone time, but like I do like socializing and meeting new people, but like it does get exhausting after a certain point. And like, especially like, after a few travel assignments, you're like, well, like, I feel like I took a little bit of a step back. Like the first couple assignments, I was like, oh, I have to like make everybody like me and I have to be super bubbly and friendly. And it was like really trying like mentally. And now I realize like, okay, I can like kind of come in like a little bit more chill and quiet and just like be more myself, and like we'll get there, like I'll still meet people and I'll still make friends, and I don't have to like feel like I'm overexerting myself like socially, I guess. So like that's hard, but yeah, I think that those are the main things. As far as like, people worry about like learning new computer systems or learning new hospitals, and that part's not the challenging part for me. I think it's more like the human interaction and like learning kind of like how the social interactions are at each hospital, and how, doctors interact with nurses and things like that. So
yeah. And names are tough to learn. I joke around. I always tell people I have name-nesia because it's a real thing.
That's a good one.
They tell me their name and I have to ask like 5 more times before I realize actually who they are. Unless you're in a clinic with like name tags, those are great. I love name tags. I used to just kind of play it off. So I would feel bad because they told me what their name was, and I was like, okay, well, I don't want to ask again because that's rude. And so I'm just going to play it off. And it's like, oh, hey, what's up? And it got to a problem because I would know them for a week. And then it's like, okay, well, I still don't know. And now you're like, you don't want to ask somebody else because they just saw you talking to them for like 20 minutes. And so then it's like 2 weeks later and you're like, I still don't know who this person's name is. And and so you kind of dig yourself into a hole. And then you're trying to figure out ways to like get their name to like come out. And one of the ways I used to do is like, oh my gosh, look at my old driver's license. Look how funny I am. And the one that kind of really backfired was I was asking someone to spell their name into my phone. So I didn't have their number. I was like, oh, perfect. So I'll just have them.
Clever.
And so they put their number in, but they didn't put their name. I was like, oh, shoot. So I was like, I won't say the person's name, but it was like, okay, so how do you spell your first name? And they're like, Ashley. I meant your last name. And it was like Smith. And it's like, oh, okay, busted.
Yeah.
But gosh, yeah. So just be open with it at the beginning and just be so apologetic that they think it's funny.
Well, and I've learned now too, because like at first I was like, well, I'm the new person, so like people should be polite and introduce themselves, but they're not. And sometimes it's because they're busy or they don't know that you're like a new traveler or whatever. They just are. Maybe they're thinking what you're thinking. They're like, oh shoot, should I know this person? And so they're afraid to ask. And so I'll just be like, hey, I'm Alex. I'm the new traveler. What's your name? Like I literally have just gotten way more direct with my like conversation with new people. Cause I'm like, well, I was like, because then it's like, at least I've like introduced myself. So it's not awkward, like 2 shifts later.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I didn't introduce myself 3 days ago. Sorry about that. Like,
I agree. I think it's so much easier, especially in awkward situations like that, just to be direct about it. It's like, okay, so a super awkward question. I heard you guys are going out. Can I join? And they're usually like pretty open to it. And so if you're just like,
I know.
Yeah, I'm kind of a awkward person, and just call it out for what it is. And usually people are pretty receptive.
I know. I was writing an article for Traveler Talk, and it was like, my suggestion was basically like, become good at eavesdropping because you might hear something that like is a conversation starter. You might be able to be like, hey, I'm interested in that too. Or like, let me tell you a story about whatever. And it's like, I mean, when you're like all alone in a new city, like that's just kind of how it's going to be. And either people are going to look at you like you're crazy and not want to talk to you, and then you just move on to the next person. Like, that's the beauty of it. You're like, okay, well,
abundance mindset.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of stories, do you have a favorite travel story?
Oh gosh. It was interesting. This isn't really a story, but I was kind of shocked. Like, you know, we're talking about everybody like is pretty friendly, but some people are very direct. And it was really interesting when I first started traveling, like without my husband. So I was explaining to someone like what we did, and they were like, oh, does your husband come with you? And I was like, no, he's in school. And so, he can't come with me. And, she said something like, well, do you guys just not like each other very much? But she was like dead serious. Like,
oh my gosh.
And I was like, I mean, that's a pretty personal question, first of all. And second of all, like, no, like, and I think I can spend 3 days away from him without like having a mental breakdown. Thank you very much. Like, yeah, I don't know. Or there's like I get a lot of like, oh, like, good thing you're doing that before you have kids. And I know I watched like, your interview with, is it Stockhausen?
Yeah, Stockhausen, Stephen.
Stockhausen. Yeah. And I was like, I bet they get a lot of that too. Like, oh, you guys probably don't have kids yet. And they're like, oh, just kidding. But yeah, I don't know if I have any other like ones that come to mind as far as like funny stories. It's just like people being like really puzzled about your life. And like, I feel like my father-in-law was really like skeptical. Like he was like, well, that's not going to work. You guys are going to keep job, you know, like, what did he say?
It was not viable.
It was not viable.
Like, we would never, like, there's no way we can keep a job consistent.
Yeah, we weren't going to keep consistent jobs. And then like, he was like, basically when we left, he was kind of like, well, we'll see you back here in like a year when you like don't want to do that anymore. And we were like, or like 5, like, okay. But it's funny. I mean, yeah, it's just, people don't know. Like, it's such a weird field. And
absolutely.
Especially if you've never met anybody that does it. And even if you know somebody that does it, like, I feel like my friends are still kind of like, I don't really understand how you like get a job. Or like, I came home on a break and I was like, my mom owns a restaurant. And so like, I worked in that restaurant growing up and know all the staff. And one of the guys was like, oh, why are you here? And I was like, I got fired. And he was like, what? And I was like, no, I'm going to the next job. Like, I was like, I was like, I don't have a job right now. And he was like, thought I was serious. And I didn't have a job, but it was because I was like waiting for my next assignment to start. And yeah, it's funny. It's kind of mess with people too, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's the best part.
Yeah.
Is there any last remarks or anything that you wanted to tell the listeners?
Yeah. So if you guys are interested in any more like fitness and support or help or meeting up with other travelers that are interested in kind of the same things, I run a group called Fit Travel Life on Facebook, and it's really kind of grown a lot in the last several months. And there's recruiters, there's some people that aren't actually, I think, travel nurses, but they're just like really supportive and have a lot of commonalities as far as being passionate about like health and fitness, all different levels of people, all different ages of people. And it's just really cool to see people connect and bond over like trying to better themselves. So I would love for you guys to check our group out. And I also run my blog, fitgypsylife.com. And yeah, that's, And then if you're wanting just general traveler tips, you should also check out Traveler Talk, of course, because I'm a moderator over there and blog for them as well. That's not as much fitness, but lots of good traveler information there. So
Absolutely.
That's kind of what I'm working on lately. So
well, listeners, definitely check out those resources by Alex, and thank you so much for joining. And for the listeners, if you're looking for the next official launch of these podcasts, I put them on the New Medical Nomads podcast page. Or if you want to tag Alex in a question, you can also go to the New Medical Nomads group online. But if you're adventurous, ambitious, and you want the early access to the episodes, you can follow on iTunes, you can follow on Stitcher. YouTube's a good source as well. That way you get the earliest access to the episodes. And thank you again so much, Alex, for joining and talking about
thanks for having me.
Nurses and everything like that. And for the travelers, everyone, please have safe travels.